It was the kind of clock that didn't just tell time, it watched it. A heavy, ornate grandfather clock that had stood in the old Langford Manor for over a century, its pendulum swinging in solemn rhythm, marking every passing second like a heartbeat. When Evelyn inherited the house from her late uncle, she found the clock covered in dust, its brass face dull, the glass fogged from years of neglect. Yet when she wound it, the moment her hand touched the key, the gears groaned to life with a low, almost human sigh. The hands began to move again, slow and steady, ticking back into motion. The chime that followed was deep and rich, echoing through the empty halls. She smiled then until she noticed the time it kept. No matter how many times she adjusted it, the clock would always stop at exactly 12 o'clock a.m., not 12:01, not 11:59, always midnight. And every time it stopped, something in the house changed. The first night, she heard footsteps on the landing, light but deliberate, circling the upper floor just as the final chime rang. She called out, thinking it was a burglar, but the steps stopped abruptly. When she searched the hall, she found nothing but the faint smell of candle smoke, though she hadn't lit any. The second night, it happened again. This time, the footsteps were slower, heavier, accompanied by a faint dragging sound. When she descended the stairs the next morning, she saw something carved into the wooden banister, faint, shallow scratches forming letters she couldn't quite read. By the third night, she was ready. She sat in the parlor as the clock ticked toward midnight, her pulse keeping time with it. The air grew colder with each passing second. The final chime rang and then silence. The pendulum stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then came a whisper from the dark hallway beyond the clock. "You wound it." The voice was low, rasping, like dry leaves scraping across wood. Evelyn froze. "Who's there?" she demanded, forcing her voice to stay steady. "You brought me back," it whispered again, closer now. The air around the clock shimmered faintly, and for just an instant, she saw a shape reflected in the glass doll, thin, featureless. She stumbled backward, heart pounding. The reflection vanished. The clock stood silent, its hands frozen at 12. That night she couldn't sleep. Every creak, every sigh of the house felt alive, listening. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of the clock. In her dream, it stood in the same parlor, but the walls were cracked and rotting, the windows blacked out. The clock's face had no hands, and something inside it was breathing slow, ragged breaths that made the pendulum twitch. A voice from within said, "Keep me wound." She woke with a gasp to find the key in her hand, though she'd left it on the mantel. Her pulse hammered as she stared at it. The next morning, she tried to move the clock, but it wouldn't budge. The wood had fused with the floor. The nails rusted into the boards as if the house itself didn't want to let it go. When she tried to stop the pendulum, the chain burned her fingers, leaving a faint black mark that wouldn't wash away. That night, the storm rolled in, lightning flashing through the windows, thunder rattling the glass. Evelyn sat alone, the ticking echoing in her skull. At 1 minute to midnight, she stood before the clock. The second hand trembled, its motion uneven. "Please," she whispered to no one, "just stop." The final second struck, and the clock began to chime. But this time, it didn't stop at 12. It kept ringing 13 times, 14, 15, each chime louder than the last, until the sound filled every room, vibrating through her bones. Then, from behind the glass, a hand pressed outward. Pale, thin, fingers, long enough to leave trails of frost. On the inside of the glass, Evelyn stumbled back as the hand pushed harder, cracking the pane. The chime stopped abruptly. Silence fell. Then a faint click, the sound of the clock winding itself. When the neighbors came days later, they found the front door locked from the inside. The clock stood still, its pendulum swinging lazily again, keeping perfect time for the first time in decades. The hands pointed to 12 o'clock, as always. Inside the glass, faintly etched by frost, was the outline of a woman's face, eyes wide open, mouth parted as if whispering for help. From that day on, the Langford clock never stopped again. But every night, just before midnight, if you listen closely, you can hear a second voice ticking in rhythm with it. One that isn't mechanical at all,